Well, good afternoon to you. It is 5:06 here on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up here at 5:30, we'll speak to a woman from Speech First. Her name is Cherise Trump. And we'll get into how the left is using its crazy college campuses to advance its support of terrorism nationwide. It's not just one college. It's happening all over the place, and they're doing it proudly. We'll discuss. I'll share some of the audio, some of the writings that these people are putting out, and what we can do about all of this. And then you can chat with us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A very fraught moment now internationally, and certainly for Israel. They were just subjected to a violent terror attack over the weekend, now amassing troops to prepare what appears to be a big ground incursion into Gaza. You know, for a long time, Israelis lived in Gaza, and that was until the early 2000s. And I was, seeing some of the statistics on all of this and what things were actually like in the Gaza Strip. While they had Israelis living in Gaza, while the Jews were there, things were a lot nicer. Did you know that? They were dramatically nicer. And then when they left, it's become a hellhole, a complete hellhole in Gaza. And the left says that that's Israel's fault. It's Israel's fault that it became a hellhole. No, with no consideration whatsoever. Okay, well, the population changed. What was left behind? What was created out of that? It's just so crazy. They'll take obvious truths and invert them and distort them beyond recognition. And now you have just animals coming across the border. What would animate somebody to behead a baby? Right? What ideology would do that? It doesn't matter what you believe in. Nobody's for that. We played that audio yesterday. Remember Omari Stoudemire, who came out and said, how can you even, there's no gray area here. This is not one of those close calls. It's not like, oh, let me just find out more information. Let me wait until I see more, right? Where's that audio? I want to pull up this Omari Stoudemire audio again. Here he is, former NBA superstar Omari Stoudemire, just being really crystal clear about what's going on here.
I woke up, man, this morning with some disturbing news out of Israel that Hamas kidnapping children, putting them in cages, killing women, killing the elderly. That's some coward shit. That's cowardly. And for all y'all Black Lives Matter who ain't saying nothing, well, let me figure out exactly what happened before I say anything.
You know what's crazy? Black Lives Matter chapters across the country today are supporting Hamas. They're not just saying nothing. They're actually supporting Hamas. They're saying things like, we stand with Palestine against Israel. The place that just had children kidnapped and beheaded, women raped, that's what you decided to pick now of all times to come out to support the terrorists?
Well, let me figure out exactly what happened before I say anything. F you. Figure out what? It ain't never been cool to kidnap kids and put them in cages. It ain't never been cool to kill women and elderly. Never been. No matter where you from, what you represent, what tribe you from, it don't matter. There ain't never been no cool. There ain't never been none that nobody supported. And then you go and hide and put the kids in front of you as a barricade. That's some coward. All you politicians who always have something to say on the contrary, I see you. F you. All you Black Lives Matter people who always have something to say and always supported everything else and you quiet now, F you too. Only place in the world where I can go and study Torah and eat kosher food. Only place in the world. Some coward dog, and all y'all supported, F you. On my mama, we don't respect none of y'all for that. Peace.
Yeah, you said it right. He said it right. So again, what could possibly motivate a people to do something like that? That you'd have to have no sense of humanity whatsoever to behead a baby. None whatsoever. This is it's also wild. I can't believe all of it. Let me take some phone calls. We do have a lot of people who want to weigh in on this. Keith is in Vienna, line 1. Keith, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, trying to remember. I think it was the Hamas spokesman, whatever, that said that there are no bodies, nobody's been killed.
Yeah, the Hamas spokesman said. Let me just play this so people can recall. This is if they haven't heard it yet. This. They call him doctor. He's a doctor. I guarantee you, he's not an actual doctor. His name's Bassem Naim. He's the head of political and international relations in Hamas, which is just to say he's a propagandist. And he was on Sky News making this claim.
Are you saying that civilians have not died?
We didn't kill any civilians. It depends.
What about the 260 bodies? What about the 260 bodies at the music festival? Do you realize how absurd that sounds?
Now, within the operation, I cannot confirm this Israeli propaganda, because we have also news and videos showing that Israel and what Israel is today doing inside Gaza.
Okay. Anyway, but that's the guy you're referring to, the Hamas propagandist, Keith.
Right. My comment is I guess he's taking his cues from cringe, because the border's closed.
Right, where she just lies to us with a straight face. This is a common theme among authoritarian regimes, where they have people who will go out and tell you not to believe your lying eyes. What was the guy's name? Baghdad Bob or whatever? Yeah, Baghdad Bob. That's exactly right. As America was invading, going into Iraq, Baghdad Bob, on behalf of the Iraqi regime and Saddam Hussein, was insisting the Americans are not here. They're not in Baghdad, and we were actually. I think in some of the tellings, people claim that you could see the tanks rolling in behind him or something as he was saying this. But at any rate,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's like protests are mostly peaceful, and the building was burning down behind that reporter.
Totally right. It's crazy, and you don't lie unless you're trying to advance some demented agenda, and that's of course what they're doing. Thanks, Keith. I appreciate the comparison there. Yeah, Corinne, she specializes in these types of lies. Oh, everything's fine. The economy is great. Bidenomics is a rousing success. Our border is secure. Joe Biden's working on Israel as we speak. She lied. They lied yesterday about that. He wasn't working on Israel. He was testifying to the special counsel, Robert Hur, about the fact that he stole documents, classified documents, while he was vice president of the United States. And they didn't tell us until yesterday evening, long after they had lied that he was spending his whole day out of public sight focused on Israel. It's just one lie after the other. Howard in Manassas now, line 3. Howard, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yes, sir, Vince. I heard your question, and I'm pretty sure, and I know you know the answer to your own question. They hate the Jews. They hate the Christians. They're the little Satan. We're the big Satan. And the reality, I agree. I mean, we all have enemies and don't like people, but it is a whole different level. I mean, we treat our farm animals that we slaughter for food better than they treat the Jews. And nobody in their right mind can do that except for evil people. And there's no changing them. It's an ideology. They need to be killed. And sadly, you know what's going to happen. I don't want their women and children to be killed, but women and children will get killed, and our liberal media will slap that all over the place. The difference is the Israelis are not specifically going to be trying to kill their women and children.
In fact, Howard, to your point, the Israelis have been warning the civilians in the Gaza Strip that they need to clear out of a number of areas immediately because of these airstrikes and Israeli response. They're saying, please, if you're a civilian, if you're a woman, if you're a child, get out of there. But Hamas is instructing everyone in Gaza to ignore the Israelis, please, which means that they're trying to get their own civilians killed to achieve the outcome you're talking about, Howard. And this has been a long-term tactic for Hamas. They stage their military operations, their weapons stores out of hospitals and schools and out of private homes. It's done with intention. They want to try and propagandize the Western media into believing that Israel is targeting civilians. Israel is targeting military targets, and Hamas is using civilians as human shields.
Absolutely, and they will keep on doing it. And let the liberal media not remember this. These are the same people that throw homosexuals off of buildings and kill them as well, because they're going to lift them up, and we know what's coming. from the squad and all of our liberal media.
I know. And Rashida Tlaib flies a Palestinian flag and a gay pride flag outside of her office to this very day. Literally yesterday, you could walk by her office and she's got a pride flag and a Palestinian flag flying outside of her office, and none of that makes any sense whatsoever, Howard.
No, sir, it doesn't. And I pray for Israel, and I know all of us Christians, you know, we don't believe necessarily the same, but our same God tells us to pray for the Israels. And missionaries have been saying for years, they think there's two main reasons that the United States has been so blessed. One is the fact that we used to send about 80% of the world's missionaries out. The other is our relationship with Israel. And if you know anything about the Bible, you want to be on Israel's side, and I am.
Well, yeah, and if you have a soul at all, you'll recognize that you should be on the side of Israel on this, because the people who went in there were demons. The terrorists. I thought this weekend, Howard, when I saw this imagery coming in, and you begin to learn the full scale of the terror attack here, I said, this is demonic. You framed it correctly. There's a spiritual battle going on here, and I know what side the demons are on. You could tell that instantly. There's no reason to pause on that subject. Howard, thank you very much for the call.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Let me get Phil in Fredericksburg in here. Phil always has something to say, and here he is now. Phil, good afternoon, sir.
Hey, look, Vince, I 100% stand behind Israel, and it was very irritating to see the man who actually financed the murderers of the Jewish people to say he stands with Israel. But to this point, look, he better be careful how much he supports Israel, because our southern border is wide open, and Hamas can infiltrate that, get in cars and drive right to Washington, D.C. and send them a message. So this southern border affects his security as much as it affects our security. And everyone in Israel, we love you, we support you, we grieve with you, and we want you to go out there and get those people and deal with them the way Israelis deal with people.
Yeah, they're tough people for sure. Phil, thank you very much. On Phil's point, and kind of tying together my last conversation with Daniel Turner as well, the Wall Street Journal has a piece up that they put up last night, headlined "How Biden's Policy Enriched Iran," which funded all of this terror against Israel this past weekend. They say the Wall Street Journal's report that Iran signed off on the Hamas assault on Israel should jolt President Biden from his failed Iran strategy. A place to start would be honesty about how U.S. policy has financed Iran's support for Hamas. Secretary of State Antony Blinken insisted over the weekend that the $6 billion the administration unfroze in exchange for the release of 5 American prisoners wasn't used to attack Israel. That may be technically true, the Wall Street Journal says, but there's no question the U.S. decision to ease enforcement of oil sanctions against Iran has aided Israel's enemies. Speaking of the proceeds from the $6 billion in unfrozen assets, Blinken said on ABC's This Week that, quote, not a single dollar from that account has actually been spent to date, adding that it, quote, is very carefully and closely regulated by the Treasury Department to make sure it's only used for food, for medicine, for medical equipment. But money is fungible, the Wall Street Journal editorial board says, and Tehran doubtless anticipated the increased cash flow when it plotted the attack. News reports say Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had been coordinating with Hamas since August, which is about when the U.S. agreed to the prisoner swap that would give Iran access to the $6 billion. More important, the U.S. also throttled back enforcement of oil sanctions, which gave Tehran billions more dollars to finance Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist proxies. Iran's oil production jumped to 3 million barrels a day in August. You heard Daniel Turner just cite that number, 3 million barrels a day in August, from 2.6 million in April, according to OPEC. Iran's oil minister said in August the country's oil production would hit 3.4 million per day by the end of September, the highest since 2018, when the Trump administration imposed sanctions. So Trump imposes sanctions, Biden relaxes them. Iran's exports have increased even more by about 1 million barrels a day this year because it also has been shipping stored fuel, namely to China. Fathom that. Iran has ramped up oil production at a faster rate than the United States as the Biden administration turned a blind eye to its sanctions circumvention. Iran's production surge occurred mostly over the summer as the administration sought to strike a new nuclear deal with Tehran and counter rising U.S. gasoline prices. The White House might say that this is necessary so Russia wouldn't benefit from rising oil prices amid its agreement with Saudi Arabia to curtail production. But the Saudis scaled back production in part because of Iran's growing exports, and Russia is benefiting anyway from higher oil prices by dodging the G7's price cap on its exports. It's fair to ask if the administration has let Iran and Russia evade sanctions because it doesn't want to be blamed for higher gas prices, as it continues to add regulations to limit U.S. production. I'm telling you, they're saying everything I just talked about with Daniel. In any case, they say Tehran isn't using the $30 billion to $40 billion it generated from oil exports to buy food and medicine. It's been arming Israel's enemies and supporting Russia's war machine as they seek to destroy America's allies. Who made all this happen? Joseph Robinette Biden, whatever his suffix is, Junior, whatever. It's him. Joe Biden made this happen. And all of the people around him pulling his strings. Just unfortunate answers to that question, as a number of lefties around our country and around the world are chanting against Jewish people, anti-Semitic chants, chanting for the destruction of Israel and chanting on behalf of the terrorists of Hamas. This is the sound outside the Sydney Opera House in, of course, Sydney, Australia. Bleep the Jews. Bleep the Jews. This is after terrorists wreaked havoc, killing so many Israelis, kidnapping so many others. That was happening in Sydney this week. We're going to talk about what's happening on America's college campuses as well. Coming up next with Cherise Trump from Speech First. A lot to get to. Stay with us. Good afternoon to you. It is 5:35 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We've got a ton of headlines coming out of America's college campuses, including places like Harvard, where 31 Harvard organizations have joined together to blame Israel for the terror attack by Hamas. They said Israel is, quote, entirely responsible. The New York Post reporting on that. Former Harvard president Larry Summers is upset about all of this. He says he's disillusioned and alienated. He said that he was really angry about the silence of Harvard's leadership. And he said that, coupled with a vocal and widely reported student group statement blaming Israel solely, has allowed Harvard to appear at best neutral towards acts of terror against the Jewish state of Israel. It also extends to places like Columbia University, where a student group celebrated Hamas's, what they call historic, end quote, massacre of Israeli civilians. National Review with this. Columbia student group celebrates historic Hamas counteroffensive against Israeli civilians. We know now that there were babies who were beheaded in addition to all the rapes, murders, and kidnappings that Hamas did this weekend. For more on this, I want to bring in Cherise Trump. She is the executive director at Speech First and joins us now. Cherise, good to have you with us. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
What is happening? It's all over the place. George Washington University, University of Virginia. There's all these student groups who are releasing statements on behalf of Hamas. How is that even possible?
Yeah, it's fascinating, but ultimately not that surprising. I mean, these groups, at Harvard, there were over 30, I believe, who signed that letter. These groups have existed on the campus for a while now, and on these other campuses as well. And we've seen evidence over the last few years especially, but even, you've heard of these boycott, divestment, and sanctions movements on college campuses that target Israel, Israeli companies, or even companies that do business in Israel. There's been a number of movements on college campuses where students have, essentially as student government members, tried to require clubs and organizations of all kinds to participate in these anti-Israel movements, which was, against their will, which is coercion and obviously viewpoint discrimination. And the administrators always hesitated to really say anything about it being anti-Semitic or, that it's just blatantly viewpoint discrimination or that this is coercion. You're not even trying to teach students the legal ramifications of doing this type of things, or try to, let them know that this is un-American, fundamentally un-American, and
Yes.
anti-free speech and free expression. But what the administrators will often do is say, they make excuses for them. They'll say, look, we need to have time to have this conversation, and we need to, all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and also we should have all groups represented. They always like to say that. That's usually the reaction when students try to shut each other down. Oh, all groups should have equal representation, rather than actually educating their students on the law and the American legal system.
Totally.
They'd rather just, this is what the most disconcerting thing is you're not seeing administrators stand up for
But
it.
these are supposed to be America's most august institutions that turn out the most impressive people who are in charge of literally everything. And what I'm seeing is a tremendous amount of ignorance, even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence. How much footage do you need to see of women who were raped and kidnapped before you come to the realization you're on the wrong side?
Right. Well, this is what was most surprising to me. So I wasn't surprised that there were pro-Palestinian groups and pro-Hamas groups on campuses. But what surprised me at most is there is so much video footage and evidence of these atrocities, and they're not beating around the bush here. Hamas even puts in their charter from the 80s, it hasn't changed today, that they want to eliminate all Jews. This is not something that they restrict to just military operators. They want to kill all Jews, and this is a designated terrorist organization by the United States. So this is not a secret here that they commit human atrocities, and there's a lot of evidence of it. But that the students would just ignore that, and that there's a cognitive dissonance. That's what's most surprising about all of this.
Right. And there's also I think a fundamental, in my view, a fundamental sort of anti-Western sentiment that's built into all of this. They consider Israel to be an occupying force, that they are colonizers. This is the language that these lefties use. And it's, to me, Cherise, it's completely incoherent, because literally yesterday, the left was trying to celebrate, quote, Indigenous Peoples Day. Well, what about the Jews in Israel? How come they're not standing up for them? I mean, they're the indigenous people to this region of the world, and they're not standing up for them. They're saying that they're colonizers who need to be destroyed.
Well, it comes back down to the cognitive disconnect here. And what's happening is, so this is when you have this far-left Marxist ideological perspective where everyone either fits into the oppressor category or the oppressed category. It doesn't leave room open at all for nuance. You can't have someone who maybe you consider somewhat oppressed who also is vicious and commits abhorrent acts. And because in your mind, they have to either only be oppressed or only be the oppressor. And so when they're talking about decolonization, this is how they're able to justify it in their minds. And because college campuses really are not a good space anymore for intellectual dialect or, deep discussions or fervent debate, what ends up happening is students just cling to their beliefs. No one pushes back on anyone. No one engages with opposing ideas. No one gets to hear alternative facts or ideas. And what ends up happening is they all just kind of cling even tighter and tighter to their own worldviews, and nothing gets discussed. And you end up getting this vitriol, this hatred against one another that you're seeing. I think a survey just came out from College Pulse earlier this year said 30% of students thinks it's okay to use violence, physical violence, against someone that they disagree with. This is talking about how they justify shouting down speakers, throwing Molotov cocktails at speakers, setting things on fire. This is how they justify punching someone in the face if they disagree with them, which is what happened to one of our interns on his campus when he wore a MAGA hat. So you're seeing this left and right where they are able to justify violence for their own ideological views. But then this is the same group that will turn around and say that speech is violence and that all free speech is hate speech, because really what they're saying there is that anyone who disagrees with them is violent, and that's how they justify it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter, just to kind of add on to the point that this is an anti-Western movement, Black Lives Matter Grassroots, according to the Washington Free Beacon's Andrew Kerr, is a group that represents 26 local Black Lives Matter chapters all across our country. And they released a statement last night calling Hamas, the terrorist group's murder of Israeli civilians, a, quote, desperate act of self-defense. And they said that they stand unwaveringly on the side of the oppressed. They support Palestine. And they said, quote, as Black people continue the fight to end militarism and mass incarceration in our own communities, let us understand the resistance in Palestine as an attempt to tear down the gates of the world's largest open-air prison. As a radical black organization grounded in abolitionist ideals, we see clear parallels between black and Palestinian people. I'm not sure they could be more blunt about their support for terrorism.
Yeah, this is the fascinating thing. Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. They are funded by regimes like Iran and Qatar. And Qatar is actually one that most people don't talk about. They don't point fingers at them. They are actually huge donors to a lot of universities, and they're behind most of the anti-Semitism we see on campuses today, honestly. And so it's not just Black Lives Matter. You're seeing groups, I think, various other groups putting out Day of Resistance flyers, right? And they have drawings of the hang gliders that they've added into these flyers. So they are aware of the tactics. I mean, that was the hang glider was coming in at the music festival. These were clearly civilians. These were not military.
What campus was that on? What campus was that on?
That was California State in Long Beach.
Okay, so they to put an emphasis on this point that you're bringing up, Cherise Trump is our guest from Speech First. There was a student group who used an image, like a cartoon version of one of the Hamas hang gliders soaring across the border into Israel to kill, rape, and kidnap Israelis. They used an image of the hang glider as some sort of image of heroism to support what they say is the Palestinian cause on an American college's campus.
Yeah. And what, again, it's look, these groups can express their views as far as they want. They're still in America. They have free speech rights. But at the end of the day, why does it take Harvard 2 whole days to actually say that these groups are not representative of the views of Harvard, especially a school with a long history? Their history goes back pretty far with Harvard University when it comes to anti-Semitism. I mean, they specifically had a policy on their campus for years that said that they would never admit Jews. Like, they were very blatantly anti-Semitic at Harvard, and this is what led to the founding of schools like Brandeis and University of Chicago. But again, so for a school like that to have that kind of history, you'd think they'd be much quicker to disassociate themselves with those types of viewpoints, especially looking at the atrocities that are taking place on the ground in Israel right now.
Yeah, but well, look, I mean, it was just this year the Supreme Court had to come in and say Harvard has to stop using racial discrimination as a basis for admitting students into the school, which they continue to do until this day. So it kind of changed who they're targeting as time goes on, but it just continues. Unfortunately.
Absolutely.
So you're with Speech First. So obviously you're for more speech. You're not for less speech. You don't want to you don't want to imprison these people for being as dumb as they are. But what is the answer? What can we do to pull people out of their ignorance and get them away from this idea that they think somehow they're in the right by supporting the terrorists here?
We need more discussion on campus. We need more professors and faculty members who are willing to be courageous enough to have these conversations in their classrooms, to have these debates. That's the biggest thing that we're missing right now. I've spoken to a number of faculty across the country who've told me they do not hold class discussion anymore during their class sessions because they are afraid of being reported for creating unsafe spaces. That type of thinking is what's deteriorating the campus. Look, and I don't blame the faculty members. They're concerned for losing their jobs, their reputations. Everything's at stake here, and this is the problem. We need to look at these policies that force people into a state of fear and self-censorship because they're afraid of being reported. That's what we litigate against. We sue universities based on some of these reporting systems that we've seen, where they're basically anonymous systems where students can report on one another for incidents of bias or having opinions or being offensive. And the universities track these students and faculty members who are reported, and they sometimes put them through re-education, which they call sensitivity training, based on them being reported. So it's hugely concerning. It's very Orwellian. The campus is not in good shape right now for speech, and this is what's leading to this lack of discussion and engagement. Students need to be able to hear opposing ideas in a mature setting, in a respectful manner. They need to be able to push back on each other with facts, and they need to be pushed back on in order to develop themselves intellectually. And we just have a complete depletion of that right now.
Right, that's right. So courage is definitely the point here. But as you're saying all of this, it does remind me that we've seen this happen a lot throughout history. As countries descend into Marxist hellholes, the predicate for that is typically student movements who will become threatening to the adult leaders. And you have young people who are basically it's a color revolution. It's a cultural revolution where they are wielding control over the people who actually know better and who are scared for their livelihoods if they speak out against these children.
Right, absolutely. But they are being egged on by, there are bad actors on campus at the administrative level across the country. And this is something that we've seen. I think that study just came out. We've been tracking what's going on with diversity, equity, and inclusion departments, these DEI departments all over campuses that have been on the rise for the last 5 or 6 years. But there was a study that came out just last year, I think, where actually they looked at the social media accounts of a lot of these DEI administrators and found that they make very anti-Semitic and anti-Israel comments on a regular basis. So these are the people who are leading entire departments on campus, stoking that sentiment when they see it, using students to their own political advantages. So yes, you have two kind of categories here. You have three probably. You have more apathetic, complacent faculty and administrators and students who don't really care that much to get involved in any of this. But then you have the ones who are just afraid and they censor and keep their head down and try not to ruffle any feathers and avoid discussion. And then you have the others that basically take advantage of this environment and, impose their more tyrannical tendencies on people by forcing them to bend to their will. And those are the bad actors. Those are the ones who we should be focusing our efforts on. They should be removed from the academy. They should not be able to get hired again in the academy. We need to be much firmer with our stance on people who try to shut down speech.
Yeah. And by the way, I said color revolution. I meant cultural revolutions. That's what
absolutely. Yeah.
What that each of these Soviet spaces have experienced. Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, Cherise Trump. Really good to talk to you today. As always, we have breaking news for you. George Santos, the New York congressman, has been charged today by the Biden administration with 23 counts of conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States, wire fraud, making materially false statements to the FEC, falsifying records, aggravated identity theft, on and on and on. Basically, he's a big phony and a liar. Obviously, George Santos is a liar. That's a matter of public record. But, of course, the Biden administration comes flying in to drop charges on him. They want to kill all the good fun. He's like the Sacha Baron Cohen of our time. He was just a phony guy. He was pretending to be a million different things. He's like, Leonardo DiCaprio's character in To Catch Me If You Can. It was just like, he's a con man. And he was a hoot. But now they're charging him. And it's not hard to see why. It's not because justice is blind. He's getting his just desserts. No, the Biden administration is running a political operation out of the Justice Department. And they're going after this guy because it's literally MSNBC's favorite topic. When they don't want to talk about the collapse of the entire American system under Joe Biden, they talk about a no-name congressman from Long Island who's a liar. George Santos. Have you heard the latest George Santos news? Like, seriously, I'm telling you, I know you don't watch MSNBC, but they really do this all the time. They think this is the most important story in the country. So the fun apparently is going to stop. They're going to they've charged this guy with a bunch of different stuff. Meanwhile, in much more important news, the speaker's race is underway. The candidate forum has begun. Republicans are appealing to one another at this moment about who should become the next Speaker of the House. Steve Scalise told CNN a short while ago, as he entered this forum, that he is confident that they will begin the voting tomorrow to elect a new Speaker of the House. Scalise, one of the leading contenders for this role alongside Congressman Jim Jordan, should have the speaker race stitched up in the near term. That's what they're telling us. That's the breaking news here. As always, stay with WMAL for all the latest on literally everything that matters. The great one, Mark Levin, up next.